Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits and welcome to night 3 of the 2025 Spring MiniSkein mini-series, where every night we are going to be dyeing up MiniSkein sets using 20-gram MiniSkeins and creating a set of 5 or more colors that are intended to work together well in a single project. Now tonight I want to create a speckle set. And I have a bit of a vision of starting with some colors and building on those more and more to create an overall gradient. And there are a few things that we're going to do differently tonight than we did in nights 1 and 2 of the series so far, including starting with some new MiniSkein yarn bases that I have not used in past SMSMS. Earlier this year, Wool to Dye For came out with a lot more of their yarn bases in 20-gram MiniSkeins. And so that expanded even further what I can use to create these fun sets. Before we go take a closer look at the yarn, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. The yarn bases we're gonna dye include some old favorites. We have 100% superwash merino, a superwash merino yak nylon blend. We have a sparkle blend that is superwash merino, nylon, and silver stellina. But then we have 3 yarn bases that I haven't dyed in previous SMSMS. We have this zebra base, which is 80% superwash merino, 20% nylon. But what makes it unique is that one of the strands of this 2-ply yarn is variegated black and white. And so that's what gives it that, quote, zebra effect. There's no actual zebra fiber in it. We have a superwash merino cashmere silk yarn, which is a new one that I have not dyed yet. At least I don't think I ever have. And then we have this gorgeous, luxurious superwash merino silk yak blend that I've dyed full skeins of multiple times, but I've never dyed the minis, and so I'm super excited to create this speckly fade set, starting with these 6 bases, but again, we may pull in more eventually. Now, I've separated the MiniSkeins into sets of 5 20-gram minis, so we have these 100-gram bundles here. In this particular circumstance, it's going to be really easy for me to, for each colorway that I dye, to make sure I have one of each bundle because they look so different, especially with the zebra. But one thing that you can do if you want to make sure that you're dyeing mini batches and you keep them separate is you can hook the zip ties together, which again, I'm not going to do right now, but it's something you can do. Now, normally with some of these bases, especially the ones that have silk, if I was dyeing something more immersion style, I would want to pre-soak them overnight. But since we're doing speckles, countertop speckles, where some of the base color is probably going to show through, if there is a little dry patch, it's not as big of a deal. So I'm going to pre-soak this for probably about an hour just because of the volume of yarn. And right now I'm just going to wait for the water volume to go up a little bit. You can use the sprayer to help wet things. That's all up to you, or you can have your bucket already partially full to make it easier to submerge things. And with speckles, we're probably going to have a lot of yarn mops, but I'm going to start with some crazy worsted today and pre-soak this alongside all of the yarn. There we go. Now you may notice that I have not added any acid yet into our pre-soak. We will need to add acid to the yarn before we dye it because I'm going to do countertop techniques and I'm not using citric acid or anything mixed in with our dyes. But this is a very big volume of water, so I'll probably set up a bath that has less water with vinegar, but then I can dunk 100 or 200 grams of yarn at a time into that before going ahead and doing those speckles, just because it'll be a little bit easier. But there would definitely be no harm to me adding acid to things right now. It's just, I like having the flexibility of having my big pre-soaks have no acid in them. This means that if I change my mind about a project, I have no acid on the yarn yet, so that gives me flexibility to get coverage of color or what have you later on. Also, it means I can soak yarn for multiple projects altogether, and again, just increases that flexibility. So anyway, I'll see you in about an hour. And I know I often say 30 minutes is sufficient. 30 minutes is sufficient, but normally I probably would have pre-soaked this overnight, so we'll just give it a little bit longer. It's not gonna hurt anything. And if when I remove the yarn, if things are looking like there's a lot of dryness, I can always give it more time. This is the palette we're gonna use today. A combination of Dharma Acid Dyes Peach Blush, Blued Steel, Berry Crush, Bright Aqua, Platinum, and Intense Iris. My plan is to start with 2 of the colors and then add a color for each additional mini skein. So that way, one mini skein is going to be mostly white with a little bit of 2 of the colors, and then the one at the end is going to have all 6. But to help me play around with the color order, I think I'm going to start out by dyeing a sock blank. I think in all of the SMSMS videos I've ever done, this is the first time I've dyed a sock blank before I've dyed any mini skeins. And I do love to compare sock blanks and mini skeins dyed similar ways. We'll talk about that more as we go through the video. But specifically for this project, I realized it would be really helpful for me to visualize what I wanted to create and how I wanted the colors to play together if I was using them all at once on the counter versus starting with the first color in a 5-color set. So let's go prototype and play with these colors. I put on my deluxe rubber respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves so I could start applying the dry dye powders onto our sock blank, playing around with the order I think I want to use on mini skates. I had pre-soaked the double-stranded sock blank that is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon, for about an hour in plain tap water. Then I then added a couple of tablespoons of white vinegar too, so that way there's acid in the yarn before I applied the dye. And I have one of those yarn mops I showed before just off camera. I tried focusing with my plan with these colors. And I knew I wanted the platinum, one of the more subtle colors, to be all over the length of the blank. But I wasn't entirely sure with the other 5 colors which I would want the most of. So I sort of started at the bottom where I would have the most of all the colors to then help me decide in real time, looking at things, which I might want to move up. And I might change my mind after I've heat set the blank to where and when I want each of the colors to go. But I'm excited for how this will translate onto mini skeins. And we'll probably dye another blank after I finalize the colorway as well. And so that's always fun. One thing I noticed with the dry powders is that the Intense Iris isn't really popping once I've applied the powder onto the yarn. I think that that's going to pop more once I've steam set it. But I decided to swap things around a little bit, moving the pink up and then the iris and the aqua down a little bit, just so that way we could have more punch up towards the top of the blank. And I think that that should still work rather nicely. Intense Iris is a stunning color. I think it's just not sinking into the yarn as fast as the other colors, making it a little bit trickier for me visually, at least at this stage. When I was done adding the dye, I wrapped up the blank in some plastic wrap and steam set it for 30 minutes to set the color. I'm gonna wash the sock blank off camera, but here I am just opening it up to see the color progression, and the Intense Iris is really standing out more than it did before. And so I had debated swapping the colors around, but now I've swapped things back the way I had it. Moving the pink back down low. Even though I love the pink, I love it sort of really making an impact towards the end of these colors. I just really wanted to make sure that our Intense Iris stood out from the Platinum, because it was looking, before steam setting, very similar to the Platinum, and so I was concerned that the first 2 skeins would feel too similar and not as punchy as the following ones. But I adore this, and so let's go dye up some minis. While the sock blank is heating, I thought I'd show my acid bath. This basin is around a little under half full of water. I added 6 tablespoons of white vinegar. And over time, I will need to add more acid to this bath as I come over with 200 grams of our minis and another yarn mop. The reason why I will need to add probably more acid is each time I bring over some pre-soaked yarn, I'm introducing some more liquid, and so I may add more water and acid as needed here. And without even really waiting, I'm squeezing out most of the water, but there is still some liquid in here. Mainly so that way when I add the dry dye powders on, things can dissolve. And now I'm going to try to spread things out. And the nice thing with minis that look visually distinct is that it makes it a little bit easier to make sure some of them are available at the surface and that we don't have, for example, one that is underneath everything else. But some minis may get more color than others. The nice thing is that I have a plan that should be pretty reproducible with how much of each color I'm going to add each time. And all of this yarn was in the bath with acid for maybe a minute. I'm going to go ahead and add more yarn to it just so it'll be ready to go after I finish this. But a minute, 20 minutes, that doesn't really matter. I am, however, and you've probably already seen me remove the blank from the steamer basket and open it up, but I'm going to wait to remove that before I finalize the edits I made to my color progression. I got sick of waiting. We may as well do our first color here since I know what I want to do with it. Now, one of the colors I'm speckling all over, and I'm wearing my respirator mask now, by the way. One of the colors I'm speckling all over is platinum. And by speckling all over, I mean, I'm going to have some of it in each colorway. And this color is not an intense one. And in fact, I bet it's not really going to register much on our two different yak blends that we're dyeing. But I am making an effort to add some of it on there. And this is a color that I showed in another video. It looks darker when wet than it does when dry. But I expect the speckles will have some impact, even though, I mean, it's going to be pretty subtle. Now, I may not know what I'm doing with the rest of the layers, but I know that this next round is going to have peach blush on it. And I'm speckling, again, making really sure to add some of this color on to those yak skeins so we know we have some there. But I'm taking little pinches of powder, adding it on in a line, but I'm doing 2 of this color, but that's going to be the same for each other color. So that's how I know I'm going to be consistent, is because I'm going to add like 2 sections of each color as I move through. Okay, now I need to flip the yarn so we can dye the other side, and I'm not necessarily going to put things in the exact same location. On this first one, it would be really easy to do things in the same location because I can see it well, but as we move forward, it might be a little bit more random. So I'm going to kind of lean into that. And oh no, there was a tiny bit of blue that either was on my gloves or on the counter. But that's going to be okay because it's part of everything else that we have going on. So I'm not worrying about being in the exact same spot. And I don't want to add too much powder on, but our goal is to have something on the chunkier side. If you wanted really fine speckles, you can mix your powders with citric acid. But one of our keys is to try to dry off your gloves well before you go into the dye powder, because if we introduce moisture in, then we could get clumps. And now here on this side, what I'm going to do is over that blue, I specifically added some of our peach blush there, so that way we could cover it a little bit. I'm trying to pay attention to the edges, and I'm also paying careful attention to both our yak blends
and the zebra, because those are the ones where things are going to be much more subtle overall, but this will be the most subtle of all of our colorways. Now, the amount of dye I added, it's possible I went a little too heavy. We will see. It's the thing with doing like sets that aren't measured is that like if I went way punchier here than I did on the next, then that could show up in a way. But I'm not going to worry about it. What I'm going to do now, and oh my gosh, there's a little bit more of the blue. I'm not going to worry about it. What I'm going to do is pick up the yarn, and we might get color transfer between different areas on here because it's going to touch. I'm not wrapping it up in plastic wrap, but we're going to go steam set this for 30 minutes because I know that that's what I want the first colorway to be. If I didn't know that's what I wanted for the first colorway, I could have waited, but now we just have to wait for the second. And I'm going to go ahead and pop this into the steamer basket because we're waiting anyway to steam set those colors a little bit. Sometimes it helps the mop continue to mop if you heat set it in the middle. And then with a little bit of water, you can see there's not a ton of pigment left, but just wiping this down before we bring over the yarn to dye up our next color. And I know by now you've already seen the blank, but I haven't seen it yet. Now I know, and let's start with the Intense Iris since that's the new color. Now I know that the Intense Iris does show up well. I mean, I figured it would. It's a color I've used for Speckled before, and it's a color I really, really love. But I just didn't know how well it may or may not work. And again, I'm really taking care to make sure we get some coverage on those yaks and the zebra. But I really just wanted to make sure that it would hold up and fit with everything because I sort of wanted to not completely alternate, but vary the addition of colors that were more bright versus more neutral. And the more colors we add, the more it's okay if the platinum just ends up disappearing. And I'm not going to worry about the colors being in any kind of repeating order. I think on this one it may end up working out to be Platinum Iris Peach. Platinum Iris Peach. But if that is not what happens on the other side, or on any of the others, that is okay. Because there's an element to all of this. Like when some of the colors transfer onto different areas of the yarn, that'll be a little bit less repeating, but I'm sticking with straight lines. I could have done angles, but I'm just gonna try to not overthink things, with the exception of making sure the dye is on the yak. And that's really the reason for being so explicitly deliberate, is mostly because I can't really see the powder when it's on the yak. Like from up there, you can see the peach on our white yarn super well, but it's really not that loud on the bases that look so much darker now that they're wet than they do when they're dry. And see, as I flip the yarn over, you know, there's some dye on the countertop, and that's gonna go on some of the skeins in a way, and because I'm flipping it end to end versus flipping it over that way, you know what I mean? That just makes it such that things may show up in a different kind of way. But now I'm gonna finish adding the dye to the other side, doing about 2 lines of each color, and then we'll steam set this yarn for 30 minutes and wipe up the counter with our yarn mop.
Colorway 3, and time to add the bright aqua. Still keeping with the same amount of the other colors. If things start to feel more crowded, then maybe at the bottom I drop either the platinum, or I suppose I could drop the peach as well, but I prefer not to, so we'll just carry on and see where we go. But again, part of my thought process while doing something that is this both like random amount of dyes is that I'm hoping that I'm consistent with the amount that I'm adding on each layer, so it's not, oh my gosh, skein 4 has significantly more peach than skein 1, and then skein 5 has very little again. I mean, with this type of color, I don't think that would be a big deal, but I think that it is coming together really well for this speckly, yes, but more splotched colorway. The goal is for these to not be subtle, even though they may be more subtle at the very beginning. Now, I know I have not shown you me removing any of the yarn from the steamer baskets yet, but ooh, these colors, they're not gonna be subtle. They are spreading nice. I am not being light-handed here at all. But you know what? That makes it extra fun. And I didn't want the whole thing to be really, really subtle, which we could do, and I probably have done something a lot more subtle in the past, but I'm really, really happy with the direction that this is going. One thing to note is that when you're doing larger clumps of powder like this, be really careful when you're transferring the yarn into your steamer basket. I'm not sure when or if this will really show up on camera, but a glob of dye did land on my arm when I went to go move these skeins to the steamer basket, which, you know, I can wash off, but just be careful if you're walking over something. Maybe stick the yarn in a pan before moving over to your steamer basket, or make sure to wipe your floors thoroughly in case any dye falls. I brought in a few different yarn mops. I decided that one of them was going to be more for wiping the counter, one of them mostly fingertips, and then eventually when those felt very nice and covered, I brought in some others as well. One thing I'm especially happy with is that when I go and add a new color, that's the color that I'm starting to speckle with. This means that the new color has a good prominent placement on the yarn, and that just makes me happy. I'm also happy that there is really enough space for everything. Even if I was a little heavy-handed. Some of these, you'll see, are gonna be more splotches than speckles, but again, that's okay, and that'll give the colors much more of a punch in whatever they turn into, whether you're knitting or crocheting or weaving. And so I'm very happy about that. And this is going along so nicely with my vision, and I cannot wait to lay out 5 minis from one of the yarn bases. I hope I remember to do that untwisted, but I am just really happy. Finally, here I am at the steamer basket. Okay, look at how big those color sections are. Oh, this is so pretty. And you know, it does have a very like yarn mop-esque feel to it. And while I let that cool so we can wash it, and I think washing that one I'm going to show on camera, here's one more sock blank that I'm just about to show you how I'm dyeing it, and one final yarn mop to go ahead and steam for 30 more minutes. Let's go full circle and dye one more sock blank. But this time, since I know the color progression that I want, I started at the end of the lightest and worked my way down, building up the colors as I went. I did a combination of zigzags and random patterns, and even went back with a little bit more of our peach blush and platinum towards the end, just to get something that felt a bit cohesive. But thankfully, since we've dyed the other blank, I have a sense of how this is going to come out. The two blanks are going to be related, but ultimately feel quite different from one another. And I'm so excited to show these to you next to the miniskeins to talk about the difference between how things may work up if you're dealing with this kind of fade and color progression out of a set of 5 miniskeins versus using a blank that unravels into 250-gram balls. And I believe you've already seen me go ahead and steam set this yarn. I will remove it off camera, but now let's go wash some yarn. We're gonna wash the set that has the most dye on it, at least theoretically. And I will admit, I've already washed a lot of this already. I'm gonna add some soap into the water before adding the yarn. This is to help with any potential back staining. And I will admit that I did not let this cool 100%. And oh my God. Okay, we're seeing more color come out. I've seen like a hint come out in some others, but nothing like that. Oh my goodness. So what's very likely to have happened here is because of the technique with adding dry dye powder, there could have been some undissolved powder on the surface. And so then now that we're finally submerging the yarn, that dye can dissolve if I added too much in one place. Now, I'm laughing because there was like no bleeding anywhere else, and this is already getting a bit better. But my recommendation, if you have something that's bleeding and you have white left behind and you don't want back staining, keep soap in there. That seems to help prevent back staining and also will help you rinse out some of that other dye. But it's funny because I've already washed skein number 4 and there was no bleeding there. Now this is better than it was before, but hilarious. I mean, okay, bleeding, oh my God, look at how big that color section is. Color bleeding is not hilarious, it's annoying, but I'm amused that it's happening in the one I saved to do on. There's some irony there, but it's fine, we're fine. And look at that. Now, I wasn't expecting the bleeding to continue on and on and on. I mean, it is possible that I added way too much dye in some areas, but maybe this like lightness that we have here, that might be what I saw at the worst on some of the others. You just really want to be careful that you don't add too much powder in any given spot. I'm so excited to see this dry. Oh. So yeah, you can see how, and maybe we have a little bit of back staining. We'll know more when we compare this to the rest of the yarn, but you can see our dye or rinse bath is now clear. The concern with back staining is that if we change our white to like a pastel color, then this might feel very different and not part of the same family as the rest of the yarn. And the other thing that I realized, and this one clearly has, this is our blued steel in contrast with our intense iris, but the last two are kind of hard to tell apart because of all the colors. But anyway, let's go look at our finished dry yarn. Here's all the yarn I dyed in this video, and a lot of times at this stage I show everything sort of jumbled up, but I have things separated into bundles of 5. So we have one progression here and one progression way over there. And it's funny, I thought that there wasn't going to be a huge difference at the very end where we added the navy, or not the navy, the blued steel, but I can really see it right now. More with the difference between that and the indigo than I could while the yarn is wet, and so I'm very happy. Here's the color progression on our crazy 8 yarn base that is 100% superwash merino. And you get less and less white as we go down and as we add those other colors in. And I think it's really, really fun. These large, vibrant speckles also look really nice on a yak blend. This one is the Superwash Merino Nylon Yak yarn. Now, we do have some big sections of color, but within there, we do have little bitty speckles breaking it up. Some colors may be a little bit more of a splotch, especially in places where I was clearly heavy-handed, but the whole thing is a wonderful speckly delight. Now there's one other yarn base that I want to point out before I go and start twisting things up. The other bases I'll show as they're twisted into the sets, and that is our zebra yarn. From far away and close up, you can clearly see the color progression and all of those colors in there. And I'm happy to add that the black of that barber pulling zebra section still shows through on even our darkest colors. The one thing I don't know is, since this yarn is already variegated, sort of white and zebra section as a bare yarn, when you go from one mini skein to the next, the way that those black sections pool will likely shift and change. And so I don't know quite how that'll work up, but I think that it's going to be really, really fun. Here is the first sock blank we dyed, and the progression of the colors here matches the progression we have on the MiniSkein sets very, very well. And we do have some differences between that blank and this blank that is the second one that I dyed. Clearly I was a lot more heavy-handed the second time around. But this is one reason why, because these are done as the same colorway, why you might want a double-stranded sock blank. Because if you made a sock out of one 50-gram ball of yarn from this blank and the other sock from this blank, the socks would have a different feel to them. They'd still be related, but the coloration and things would be different. So it's a good thing that we get matched 50-gram sets from each of these blanks. And I'm probably going to be unraveling one, so that's going to be exciting. So here we have the same technique and our same colorway. And so why might you want a double-stranded sock blank that gives two continuous 50-gram balls of yarn versus using a set of 50-gram mini skeins? On the sock blank, things in theory could be a little bit more blended. For example, we could have some colorways that feel like they would fit in between each of the individual mini skeins. Maybe, maybe not. But the blend is going to be a little more seamless because we'll have a tiny bit of pink before increasing the pink, a tiny bit of the aqua before it increases. And so it'll be more of a subtle blend of the colors. But with the individual mini skeins, you can decide where you want those color transitions to take place. So if you're making socks and you want the very first color transition to happen after the cuff, you get control over that. Whereas on the blank, yes, you could cut it to make a color transition happen a little bit sooner and remove some of the yarn. That sort of defeats the purpose of having the blank itself. And especially since not every sock takes a full 50 grams of yarn, if you're going to knit a sock from a sock blank, maybe you would lose part of the color because you wouldn't be able to have that when finished, where you would be able to more easily control where the color transitions take place with mini skeins. Of course, you'd have more ends to weave in here than here, but yeah, you can see that there's many different reasons why you might want one versus the other. One thing I'm really happy about here is the balance of where I introduced new colors. I wanted there to be a substantial difference between each mini, but I didn't want everything to be too bright. And if I had introduced, say, the intense iris and the blued steel next to each other, then that would have been a lot more subtle than the way I brought everything in. And I don't know, I just am very excited by this combination. Here I have our 3 silk blends. 2 of them are blends of silk with yak and superwash merino. One is superwash merino silk cashmere. And I would say that the colors are still really vibrant compared to the other yarns. I mean, maybe with our MCS, like, there's a hair of color difference between the two. It's a little bit softer. I'm curious to compare this with the diamond sock at some point, maybe, to see how that is. But with Speckles, the color is so saturated, and pretty much as saturated as you could ever get it in one given spot when you apply that dry dye powder onto the yarn. And so compared with other techniques, I think that results tend to be a little bit more similar overall. I rotated the camera again. Here, again, once again, we have our DK weight, superwash merino yak silk blend, and here we have our superwash merino yak nylon blend. And maybe the colors are a hair lighter here compared to that, but the colors show up, and that's what's important. And the colorways are gorgeous on both of the bases. We have a lot of yarn mops tonight. The 4 on the left are all very similar, although I guess the second from the right doesn't have any of the blued steel in it, really. But this one over here is more different because I spent a lot more time with this skein wiping up the leftover speckles in the pan and therefore blending things together more. And that's why we have so much less white over here. Now, a lot of these may look really similar to our speckled minis that I created, but the main difference is that even though we may still have a few speckles in here, the colors are overall softer because I was taking a small amount of dye and wiping it on the skeins, spreading it out and making it a little less saturated. So these yarn mops would work nicely as a fade with a speckled colorway with the same colors because there are differences, but it would be a soft transition versus a harsh one because there are a lot of similarities between them. Originally, I thought I was gonna dye a whole second round of our MiniSkein sets, which I still could do. I do have a lot of undyed MiniSkeins upstairs, and so I'm curious that if there's one night you guys would want me to dye up more of, which of the nights it would be, but this is a question I should ask again at the vlog that'll come out at the end of the series, because we still have one more night of dyeing MiniSkein sets and sock blanks to create some kind of fade or gradient sets. And then we have a bonus colorway yarn dyeing video followed by the behind the scenes vlog. And I guess that'll bring us through the end of the 2025 Spring MiniSkein mini-series. We're only half done now. So I'll see you back here tomorrow night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time for the live premiere of night 4. Now tonight is the only one of the nights where I did not unravel one of the sock blanks. And this is a decision I often leave up to my customers. I'll eventually have unraveling shorts for the other blanks I've unraveled for this series, but whenever I list a sock blank in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop, there's always an option for you to have me unravel the blank for you into 2 matched 50-gram balls of yarn, if it's a double-stranded blank, just in case you don't want to do that yourself and maybe knit from the blank and do 2 at a time socks or something like that. And so, even if it's way after the videos come out, if a customer orders a blank, I'll try to film some kind of short to showcase the blank and what it looks like unraveled in the end, because I know that's something we all love to see. And I know I asked you to subscribe at the beginning of the video, but please subscribe and turn on notifications. This is the biggest thing you can do to help the content here and help me create series like this. There are other ways you can help support the content. You can join to become a channel member and get a little badge next to your name and access to fun emojis. I have a Patreon, and then of course there's the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop filled with hand-dyed yarn that I have dyed up in these videos. Off the top of my head, I don't know what number SMSMS this one is right now, but we've been doing this for years, and I feel like each year I grow and learn so much more. And so thank you so much for supporting this series and encouraging me to play around with more yarn and dye in different ways. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for watching.